Hello, my bookworms. I know it's been a while, but between the entire world deciding to basically fucking end and some other personal stuff going down, I've been quite busy. Plus, now we're right in the middle of summer, which means that in order to record I need to close all the windows and turn off all the AC and fans, which basically means I'm gonna faint in about 5 minutes. I think, not that I've tried, I'm not that much of a masochist, but thank God for night recording, right? Anyway, I'm back, and I know that usually I prefer made-up stories, creepypastas, and whatnot, because while human cruelty can be beyond anyone's imagination, I really like the fact that in made-up stories there is no limit to anything. Literally anything can happen. But I also know that most of you really like true stories. So this is just what I have for you today. A compilation of scary stories that allegedly truly happened. So shall we just dive right into it? Let's go. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegation of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and my 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed, but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend, trying to grab my daughter, and put her up in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. But there was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at our door, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth on your back? I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed by the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Me and a friend of mine live in rural Ireland. We were going for a walk in the grounds behind a castle. As we were coming to the end of our walk, it was pretty dark and we glanced into an area that has a well, and something caught our eyes. He stayed a bit further back, walked over and looked into the well, only to see 2 yellow eyes looking up at me and a sinister looking grin from a girl with dark hair. Naturally, we ran like little girls. We were followed by this little girl all night. We went to graveyard and found her watching us while she sat on a tree. We went under a bridge a few miles outside of the village, and she was standing at the other end of the bridge and slowly started walking towards us. We both saw her every single time. Explanation is easy. We dropped a shitload of LSD and were hallucinating. Just fascinating that we both saw the exact same thing. I never told him what I saw in the well until he told me what he had seen. It matched. This just happened to me 2 days ago. I was walking into the house after work around 6 p.m, so it was already mostly dark, and suddenly the entire sky lit up bright green, and there was a super loud zap sound, just like a movie laser or something, right over my head. So loud that I hit the deck and then fucking tore ass back into the house. One of my roommates was cooking dinner and I was like, what the fuck, did you fucking see that? But he didn't. We went back outside. No transformers near or out, no houses electricity out, no sign of disturbance at all. Now, I'm a rational grown man, a believer in science and always there must be a rational explanation for this guy, but this was truly a mindfuck and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. To this day, I don't know if I was dreaming or not, but I clearly heard someone gently knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. I live alone. I personally have quite a few spooky stories, but my mom has a good one, so I will tell hers. When she was younger, her and a group of friends were driving down a desolate road at night, and there was a house that they passed that had a window lit up upstairs, so they slowed down to look, and she said there was a lantern in the window, and a man and a woman sat facing each other. She then said that a second man wearing a top hat came into view, walked up behind the woman, and started strangling her. At this point, my mom and her friends freaked out and drove off. When they went back to see what had happened, they drove up to where they had seen it happen, and it wasn't even a window they had seen, it was a plastic sheet, so they didn't know what to make out of it, but they all ended up agreeing they had seen a ghost. When I was about 10, 4 of our cousins lived with us, and I had 2 siblings, so that means there were 7 of us. We were in the family room, sitting in a circle, playing a game. My parents were out doing whatever adult errands they had that day. We all heard a voice call out, "Zachary!" It was the voice of our grandmother, and one of my cousins was named Zach. No one heard my parents come home, and they didn't mention they would be getting our grandma, so we all ran out of the room to greet her. We quickly realized my parents were not home, and our grandmother wasn't there either. We even went outside to check, and there was no one in our neighbors' yards either. We were baffled. It was one of many paranormal instances in that house, but this one was experienced by 7 people. The house I grew up in was fairly old, and my dad did some serious renovations to it. I always got the creeps from the attic, which was a full third story, and eventually my dad fixed it up as a kind of second bedroom apartment for me and my older brother. One night, when I was maybe 13, while everyone else was asleep, I heard 3 loud bangs on the wall outside of my room, right next to my head. Important note, the stairs were on the other side of the wall in a traditional Victorian style. Some steps, then a landing, 180-degree pivot, more steps. So the point on the wall where the bangs were coming from was about 8 feet off the ground. Directly after the bangs, the touch lamp next to my bed started going crazy. It had 4 settings: off, dim, bright, brightest, and it cycled through them without being touched for about 30 seconds, while out in the big open living area our stereo turned on at full volume, blaring some crazy punk album I had just discovered. I quickly ran out of my room and turned the stereo off, not wanting to wake anyone else in my family, and then just kind of sat in my room with a light on until I could fall back asleep. This was probably the creepiest experience I ever had in the house, but definitely not the only one. I had a recurring scary dream. In it, I was at my grandparents' farmhouse, which is over 200 years old. I was dressed in Victorian clothes and in the fields and walking down a strange path, but it felt like I had been there many, many times. I walked through the woods and eventually came to a cabin. It felt eerie, like a presence of death. I opened the door and there was death all around me. Cries of children filled the air. I had this dream for months. I eventually ended up visiting my grandparents on spring break or something and decided to follow my dream's path. I ended up at a cabin. It looked exactly like in my dream. I was terrified. I called my friend to try to shake my fear and cautiously opened the door. There was a burned car seat and burned children's toys scattered around the ground. I felt an awful sense of dread and backed up slowly while trying to catch my breath. I've since tried to look up missing children in the area and have found nothing. I have no idea what it all means, but as soon as I found the cabin, the dreams stopped. Not my experience, but my dad's. He is a nurse, so he has told me some pretty scary stories. Probably one of the scariest was when this one guy was dying from liver failure because he was drunk his entire life. So there wasn't anything anybody could do except wait. Now, this guy was a hardcore atheist, according to my dad, and was not shy in making it known. So, when the guy began to pass away, suddenly he gripped the sides of the bed really tight and his eyes got really wide, like oh shit kind of wide, and he started yelling, "Don't let them take me," over and over again. My dad said even after he was dead, they had a hard time getting his hand to unclutch the sides of the bed. It was almost 1 in the morning, and a strange man with a white t-shirt knocks on my door asking for help. After quick deliberation where my father went outside to talk to the man, he told me to lock the doors and get the kids into the room. Upon closer inspection, the man had a faint smear of blood on the t-shirt. When I asked him if he needed aid for the suspected wound, he told me that it wasn't his blood. 5 minutes later, my mom calls the cops. 10 minutes later, when the cops came, it was an entire squad. I didn't get to see the action because I was inside of a bedroom, huddling the kids into a circle while cop light flashed brightly through the window. I heard screaming from the cops to tell the man to stop, a barking canine, and a loud boom, but it was most likely the taser. Afterwards, more cops came to clean the blood off our walkway, and because the man came to our house, we had the right to obtain an explanation. The man is a wanted serial killer from Georgia. I live in Texas. My family members tell this story about me that I have no memory of, where I had woken them up around 2 a.m. one morning because I was screaming for someone to come and save me. My parents had rushed out of bed and ran into the kitchen where I was standing, and my sister shortly followed after them. They said I was holding a knife, trembling and screaming for someone to save me as I was pointing it at my room across the house. My eyes had never been so wide, and I seemed to be completely awake, but couldn't hear anyone. This had gone on for nearly 20 minutes, with my family screaming at me, too scared to come near me, until I had dropped the knife, put my arms to the side, and walked to my room, still wide-eyed, and fell asleep. This scared my entire family, and when I woke up the next morning to hear about it, I had no idea anything had even happened. I guess I just sleepwalk sometimes. When I was in elementary school during English, our teacher asked us to write scary stories. One girl wrote a story of taking pictures with a Polaroid and finding her dead grandpa in the picture. He had committed suicide in the garage, I think. The teacher said it was too dark, and why would she make that up? Well, the girl brought the picture in. My teacher took the photo with a face on that basically said, "Let me see this bullshit." Well, my teacher went white and sped walked out of the room. The girl went home early, and my teacher left early as well. I wish I got to see the picture, but I didn't. The scary part was her reaction. I knew it was spooky. I have a lot more from this house, which I recently moved out of. This was one of the last encounters there. One night, my daughter wasn't feeling well, and she asked for me to sleep in her bed with her. Planning to sneak back in bed with my husband when she fell asleep, I left the TV on a boring channel. Unfortunately, I was tired too and promptly fell asleep with her. I woke up startled, not sure if because I hadn't planned on falling asleep or if it was due to an eerie feeling, with the glow of an infomercial upon us. I look at the foot of my bed and catch a dark figure in the act of reaching toward my daughter. Without even thinking of what the fuck I'm looking at, I shout, "Don't you dare!" and the figure sits back immediately. I remember thinking its sitting posture was akin to a dog's mannerism. I reached to my right to yank the bedside lamp and look back to the figure, but it was gone. I'm 100% sure I was awake during this, and I was freely moving and speaking, so don't think it's sleep paralysis. This happened when I was like 10 or 11. I had a weird episode of sleepwalking where I woke up out by the school I was going to at the time, naked, in the middle of fall. Only I wasn't quite awake. It was like my eyes were stuck shut. Everything was weird and red and wobbly, kind of like the final boss from Earthbound. It still looked like my town, but it was just completely fucking wrong. Red and black everywhere, nobody out on the street, all the lights off, and I felt something on the back of my neck. I walked back to my house and tried waking up my dad, seeing if he could help. Then I actually woke up by his bed, and my feet were dirty. I've never told my parents about this because I was too freaked out by it. I don't remember sleepwalking to the school, only half lucidly walking back. It was not a fun time. I must have been about 8 at the time. A couple of friends and I were spending our Saturday at another friend's house. So, a little backstory. She had recently moved into this house. It had a walled-off room, which is creepy in itself. Why does a room need walled off? It had a window. Her dad was planning on knocking into it that weekend. So we were playing outside the house, and she looks up to see her grandma at this window. We all seen her and got excited because her grandma would make us the best butterscotch pudding. So we all ran inside to find her mom crying and her dad comforting her. Turns out the grandma had just died in a freak accident. We just assumed that her dad had already knocked into the room, but it hadn't been touched. I have many creepy stories. Living in Scotland, a lot of houses are old, so noises etc. can generally be put down to that, but this one stuck with me. I can still see her face in that window. I once saw a demon-like creature in my parents' room when I was really young. It wasn't paralysis. I was totally lucid and able to move, and really wasn't even that afraid, as I was so young I didn't immediately associate things that look scary as bad, I guess. Also, I'm convinced the apartment I'm living in is haunted. When I first moved in, I kept having nightmares and daytime visions of a girl who'd hung herself in my bathroom. They gradually went away, but ever since I started the process of moving out, I live in 2 days, things have gotten insane. The closet door keeps opening by itself. I've watched bags in the kitchen and the comforter on my bed shuffle around on their own. I've seen other people in the bathroom mirror, and I've been having increasingly bizarre and vivid nightmares. The one last night involved me getting out of bed, promptly falling back over and having a seizure, something I'm not prone to at all, and I seriously don't know if it happened for real or not. I think whatever is here is upset that I'm leaving. Funny way of showing it. This happened when I was 13 or 14, during the summer break between grades. I had a habit of staying up until around 7 AM playing computer games, not even really feeling tired until I saw sunlight outside. The family computer was in the family room, next to the kitchen, with a hallway going to the back of the house. It was about 2 AM, all the lights in the house were off, except for the monitor of the computer. I heard footsteps coming down the hall from the back of the house towards the kitchen, and I figured it was my mom coming out to tell me to go to bed. I turned towards the hallway and put my hand up between my eyes and the monitor so I could see, and this little girl, maybe 7 or 8, came walking out of the hallway. She was barefoot, wore a white nightgown, had her head bowed down like she was looking at the floor, and had long blonde hair which covered her face. I immediately froze with fear, and she turned towards me, lifted her head, and stared at me for a second. then lowered her head again and walked back up the hallway where she came from. My parents have a loose floorboard in the hallway that creaks every time someone steps on it, and I heard that board as whatever it was that I just saw walk back up the hallway. After a minute, just staring at the entrance to the hallway, I turned on all the lights in the house, one by one, leapfrogging my way back to my bedroom. Was riding some trails with my friend and my brother a week or so after a controlled burn. So it was a big empty field at the time. Saw a man in the distance in a red sweater shouting a name. We thought he was looking for his dog. We decided to go and help him. We ride past a small portion of wooden area that was still left and lost sight of him for about 30 seconds, but could still hear him calling the name. Once we got into the clearing again, he was nowhere to be seen. Keep in mind, there is no way he could have ran into the wooded area, as he was at least 200 yards from it. We stopped and looked at each other, and before we could say anything, the bright blue sunny sky turned black, and it started to thunder bad, and the wind was insane. We hauled ass home, and it was sunny by the house, about 3 miles away. Crazy. Obligatory my brother-in-law, not me. But about 2 weeks ago, he passed a car pulled over and parked all kinds of junky in the mountains and started to slow down just to be cautious. Just as he was coming up on a huge cliff on the right, his headlights lit up a dude dragging a screaming woman by the hair on the side of the road. The dude looked him dead in the eyes, pulled the girl up, then pushed her hard into the path of his truck, then took off, heading back towards the strangely parked car. He had already slowed considerably since he saw the car, so he slammed on his brakes and stopped just in time, 5 feet in front of the woman laying in the middle of the road, then jumped out to check on her. She kept saying she didn't know the guy, and I just asked him for a ride after, and wouldn't elaborate as to what after was referring to, so we're assuming hooker or stripper. She wanted my brother-in-law to just give her a ride, but he said that's a terrible idea and called the cops and waited with her. Pretty crazy, but the cool thing is his boss gave him a pass on being like 2 hours late for deliveries, which was cool. My grandfather was a truck driver at a lumber yard for about 25 years after World War II. He once told a story about how he and a co-worker both left at the same time from the yard. My grandfather would often go first and the others would follow, but the other guy insisted on taking the lead. So they're driving on the highway, full speed. His co-worker gets cut off by a car that just switched lanes without looking. He slams on the brakes. My grandfather noted this and, being so close behind, tapped the brakes and was able to do an emergency slide into the left lane without slamming into anyone. The car was rear-ended by the truck. My grandfather pulled over and came running back, only to find that the contents of the load, tons of lumber, shifted forward during the heartbreak and destroyed the cab, decapitating his friend in the process. While my grandfather was no stranger to such sights in the war, especially as someone who fought on islands in the Pacific, he said this was especially tough on him, since when you're in war, you prepare yourself for this kind of thing. You don't expect something so gruesome in civilian life. Once, when I was driving from Texas to California in the middle of nowhere, Up ahead, I saw flames. As I got closer, there was a car in the middle of the road on fire. Normally, this wouldn't be very creepy, except for the fact that I was in the middle of the desert and had been driving for hours through it. There was no one and nothing around for miles and miles. I was in the middle of a wasteland. I got out, of course, to check and see if someone was in the car. No dice. Then I thought I heard something in the trunk. A couple of banging sounds. Of course, it could have been something in the trunk maybe exploding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe someone was in it. The fire was way too hot for me to get in there and try to open it. Whipped out my phone to try to call 911, but had no signal. At that point, it occurred to me that I may have just stumbled across a murder, that the person who did this might be watching. So I got the fuck out of there. As soon as I had signal, I called the police and told them everything that I saw. A few hours later, they called me back to confirm the area I was in. They didn't find shit. So, yeah, that's my creepy story.